the morning sun broke through the curtains of the small, secluded home at the edge of the forest. It was a modest house, with a weathered wooden fence surrounding a spacious backyard. For the Bennetts, life in this isolated corner of the countryside was meant to be peaceful. Kevin and Laura had moved here to escape the chaos of the city, seeking a slower pace of life for themselves and their young son, Ethan. Kevin was the first to notice something unusual that morning. While sipping his coffee by the kitchen window, he glanced outside and frowned. The yard, usually undisturbed save for a few scattered toys, now bore a peculiar sight. In the soft dirt near the back of the yard, a trail of footprints stretched from the edge of the woods to the middle of the lawn. At first, he thought they might belong to an animal. The countryside was teeming with wildlife, after all. But as he stepped outside to get a closer look, the realization set in: these were not animal tracks. They were footprints, unmistakably human, yet unnervingly large. He called Laura to come and see, her curiosity quickly replaced by unease as she examined the tracks. The footprints were oddly spaced, as if the person had been walking slowly and deliberately. They led directly to the swing set where Ethan often played, then stopped abruptly. No return trail. No sign of anyone leaving the yard. The couple exchanged concerned glances but decided to chalk it up to a wandering hiker or someone lost in the woods. Still, the sheer size of the prints and their abrupt ending lingered in Kevin's mind long after he'd brushed them away with a shoe. That night, the house was quiet, save for the distant rustle of leaves outside. The Bennetts settled into their routine, but Kevin found it difficult to sleep. He couldn't shake the image of those footprints, or the unsettling thought that someone might have been watching them. The next morning began much like the previous one. The family eased into their day, with Ethan running out to play while Kevin and Laura prepared breakfast. Kevin couldn't resist glancing out the window again, a gnawing sense of curiosity pulling him back to the yard. This time, the tracks were impossible to ignore. Fresh footprints marked the soft dirt near the edge of the woods, following a different path but once again stopping near the swing set. Kevin felt a chill crawl up his spine. The tracks were similar to the ones he'd seen before, large, deliberate, and with no return trail. He called Laura over. She stood beside him, her face tight with concern. "We need to figure out what's going on," she murmured, her voice low so Ethan wouldn't hear. That afternoon, Kevin and Laura decided to walk the perimeter of the yard, searching for clues. They examined the ground carefully, looking for any sign of disturbance beyond the fence line. The forest loomed thick and silent just beyond their property, its towering trees forming a dense curtain. They found nothing. By evening, Laura suggested they set up cameras outside to put their minds at ease. Kevin agreed, and they positioned an old security camera to face the yard. As darkness fell, they double-checked that the system was recording and tried to settle in for the night. Sleep didn't come easily. Kevin lay awake, listening to the faint rustling of leaves outside. Every creak of the house seemed amplified, every sound carrying a hint of menace. The next morning, Kevin rushed to review the footage. His stomach churned as he fast-forwarded through hours of darkness. The yard appeared still at first, but then, just past midnight, the screen flickered slightly. A shadow moved at the edge of the frame. It was quick, barely visible, but there. Kevin paused the footage and rewound, his pulse quickening. When he played it again, the shadow was gone. Laura entered the room, her expression a mixture of hope and dread. "Did you find anything?" she asked. Kevin hesitated, unsure of what he'd seen. "Not much," he said finally, though his voice betrayed him. Outside, the swing set creaked faintly in the breeze. That night, Kevin's unease grew into determination. He couldn't rely on blurry footage and shadows, he needed to witness whatever was happening himself. While Laura put Ethan to bed, Kevin grabbed a flashlight and pulled a chair up to the back window. The hours crawled by in silence. Outside, the moon cast long shadows across the yard, its pale light illuminating the swing set and the edge of the woods. The air felt heavier than usual, thick with a stillness that made Kevin's skin prickle. Around 2 a.m., the motion sensor light near the garage flickered on. Kevin sat up straighter, gripping the flashlight tightly. For a moment, nothing moved. Then he heard it, a faint crunch, like a footstep on dry leaves. He forced himself to remain calm, his eyes fixed on the yard. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by another. It wasn't frantic or hurried. Whoever, or whatever, was out there was moving with purpose. Kevin took a deep breath and stepped outside. The cold night air bit at his skin as he clicked on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. He swept the light across the yard, stopping when it caught something near the swing set. It was a figure, partially obscured by shadows. Kevin froze. The figure stood unnaturally still, its posture rigid and deliberate. He couldn't make out details, but its sheer size made his breath catch. "Who's there?" Kevin's voice was firm but edged with fear. The figure didn't respond or move. It simply stood there, as if studying him. Then, without warning, it turned and walked toward the woods. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, the sound fading as the figure disappeared into the trees. Kevin hesitated, the urge to follow warring with a deep, primal fear that warned him to stay put. When the figure was gone, Kevin stepped closer to the swing set. The footprints were there again, pressed into the soft earth, fresh and unmistakable. His flashlight caught something glinting near one of the footprints, a small, metal trinket. He crouched to pick it up. It was a locket, old and tarnished, with no markings to indicate its origin. Kevin's hand trembled as he turned it over, a sense of dread settling in his chest. Inside, there was no picture. Just an empty frame. The locket felt heavier in Kevin's hand than it should have, as if it carried more than its weight. Back inside, he showed it to Laura. She examined it silently, her expression darkening. "Where did you find this?" she asked. Kevin pointed to the swing set. The discovery only deepened their unease. What was it doing there? Was it left intentionally, or had it simply fallen? Neither of them had an answer, but the possibilities left little room for comfort. Over the next few days, the activity escalated. The footprints began appearing closer to the house, some so near the windows that Kevin wondered how he hadn't noticed them before. The swing set creaked even when the air was still, its chains swaying lightly as if someone, or something, had been there moments earlier. One morning, Laura found the back door slightly ajar. She was certain it had been locked the night before, but now it hung open just an inch, as if someone had tried to enter but stopped short. Kevin inspected the doorframe. There were no signs of forced entry, no scratches or damage, but the lock mechanism felt looser than it should. By the third night, the family's nerves were frayed. Laura kept Ethan close, avoiding the yard entirely. Kevin stayed up again, flashlight in hand, but this time he positioned himself by the door, ready to confront whoever, or whatever, had been tormenting them. At around midnight, a loud thud jolted him from his seat. It came from outside, followed by a series of lighter knocks that seemed to move along the side of the house. Kevin's breath quickened as he stepped out onto the porch, his flashlight slicing through the darkness. The yard was empty at first glance, but then he saw it. Near the fence, half hidden in the shadow of a tree, stood the same figure from before. Its presence sent a cold wave of fear through Kevin, but now something was different. It wasn't just watching, it was closer, more deliberate, as if testing how far it could go. Kevin stepped forward, his flashlight beamed steady on the figure. "Leave us alone," he shouted, his voice breaking the stillness of the night. The figure tilted its head slightly, a movement so slow and deliberate that it felt almost mocking. Then, it took a step forward. Kevin backed away instinctively, his heart pounding. The figure stopped, as if satisfied with his reaction, then turned and disappeared into the woods once more. When Kevin returned inside, Laura was waiting, her face pale and drawn. "It's not just wandering," she said quietly. "It's watching us." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of what they both feared but couldn't yet articulate. Whatever this was, it wasn't going away. The night air felt oppressive, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Kevin and Laura sat in the dim glow of the living room lamp, too restless to sleep but too afraid to speak their growing fears aloud. The locket sat on the table between them, its empty frame a silent reminder of the thing lurking outside. Kevin had spent the day preparing. The cameras were repositioned, every lock on the house double-checked, and he kept a heavy flashlight by his side, along with a sturdy wooden bat. Laura stayed close to Ethan, her protective instincts outweighing her terror. When midnight came, the house fell into an eerie stillness. Kevin's ears strained to catch the faintest noise. At first, there was nothing but the wind brushing against the windows. But then, just past 1 a.m., the motion sensor light outside blinked on. Kevin froze, his grip tightening around the bat. Laura glanced at him, her wide eyes reflecting his fear. Slowly, he moved toward the back door, his steps careful and deliberate. The sound came again, footsteps, slow and measured, circling the house. Kevin pressed his ear to the door and held his breath. Whatever was out there was close. Too close. Summoning his courage, Kevin yanked the door open and stepped outside. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping the yard. For a moment, nothing appeared out of place. The swing set sat still, the grass swayed gently, and the woods loomed, as impenetrable as ever. And then he saw it. The figure stood at the far corner of the yard, its massive frame partially hidden by the shadows of the trees. It wasn't moving, but its presence felt deliberate, almost calculated, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Kevin raised the bat, his voice trembling but forceful. "What do you want from us?" The figure tilted its head again, that same unnatural motion that sent a shiver down Kevin's spine. Then, with deliberate slowness, it took a step forward. Kevin's flashlight faltered as the beam hit the figure's face, or what should have been its face. Instead, there was nothing but darkness, a void where its features should be. Kevin's courage wavered, the bat trembling in his grip. The figure moved again, faster this time, closing the distance with unsettling ease. Kevin stumbled back, panic clawing at his chest as he swung the bat blindly. It connected with something solid, and the figure stopped abruptly. For a brief moment, Kevin thought he'd won. But then, the figure leaned forward, its faceless void mere inches from his own. A deep, guttural sound, somewhere between a growl and a breath, filled the air. And just as suddenly as it had approached, the figure stepped back. It turned and vanished into the woods, leaving Kevin trembling and gasping for air. Back inside, Laura rushed to him, her face pale with fear. "What happened?" she whispered. Kevin shook his head, unable to find the words. His hands trembled as he placed the bat on the floor, the weight of the encounter pressing down on him. From the window, he could see the yard bathed in moonlight. The swing set was still. The grass was untouched. But in the center of the lawn, a single footprint remained, pressed deep into the earth, as if it were a warning. The days that followed were quiet but tense. Kevin and Laura avoided discussing the events of that night, though the memory lingered in the corners of their minds. They tried to return to a sense of normalcy for Ethan's sake, but the house felt different now, heavier, as if the air itself carried a warning. Kevin spent hours outside, walking the yard in search of answers. The footprint had vanished by morning, the soft dirt smoothed over by the wind or something else. The cameras, which should have captured everything, showed nothing but static during the critical moments. Laura suggested leaving. "We don't know what this is," she said one evening, her voice trembling. "But it's not safe for us to stay here." Kevin agreed, though a part of him felt reluctant, as if leaving might provoke whatever had been watching them. They packed quickly, shoving essentials into bags and boxes. By the third evening, the house was stripped of its warmth, the rooms bare and unfamiliar. Ethan sensed the tension, staying close to Laura while Kevin loaded the car. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Kevin took one last walk through the yard. The swing set swayed gently in the breeze, its faint creak carrying an eerie familiarity. At the edge of the woods, he paused, staring into the dark expanse of trees. For a moment, he thought he saw movement, a flicker of something shifting between the trunks. He didn't wait to find out. By nightfall, the family was on the road, the house fading into the distance behind them. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty highway. Laura kept looking back, as if expecting to see something following them. Kevin kept his eyes forward, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. Hours later, they checked into a small motel far from the house. The plain room felt like a sanctuary compared to the suffocating unease they'd left behind. Ethan was fast asleep, and Laura was finally resting. Kevin, however, stayed awake, his mind replaying the events over and over. In the stillness of the motel room, he glanced toward the window. Outside, the parking lot was empty, the asphalt glistening faintly under a street lamp. He told himself they were safe now, far from whatever had haunted them. But as he turned back toward the bed, something caught his eye. On the windowsill, faint but unmistakable, was the outline of a single footprint in the thin layer of dust.